sometimes you just have to get stuff off your chest, set it aside, and move on for the time being. So in addition to the fact that I really, really wish it was spring, and it is not, there are 5 trends that are very annoying to me right now. So please allow me to vent here for just a minute, and feel free to vent back in the comments. You can either vent about my venting, or you can bring in venting of your own. Here we go. All the male bashing, particularly the husband bashing. When you have people supposedly trying to promote equality in a marriage, but they apply different standards to each other, that is not equality. It just isn't. And if we're going to talk about fairness, then it has to actually be fair. When one person's flaws are comedic and silly and the others are deep character defects, that's not partnership. It's not balance, and it's so tiring, and it's damaging. It doesn't help any relationship. And it doesn't give hope to people who aren't yet in a relationship. It gives them a false impression. This isn't so much of a social trend as it is just a reality, but when you reach midlife and beyond, health issues tend to cascade. They domino. One thing begins, maybe a small thing, and before you can completely address it, another thing piles on top of it, or the thing just gets exacerbated, and then another and another. And sometimes you get to a point where the domino has just collapsed. It feels like you have to jump in immediately and correct every small issue because it gets out of hand and out of control so quickly, and it multiplies. That's just reality. Ignore something small at the early stage and it rarely stays small. Not like when we were young. Okay, the big one, all the ranting about emotional labor, cognitive labor, mental load, domestic labor, invisible labor, relational labor. There are 2 really common assumptions underlying in the vast majority of these complaints. The first is that people haven't had these kind of loads for all of human history. They have. The second is that only very specific people experience those things because of the very selective recognition of when it occurs. Human beings have always carried invisible responsibilities, always. That part isn't new. The conversations may be new, the labeling may be new, but the weight of responsibility of being an adult, that's not new. It happens in every part of life. Then there's this discussion about giving up yourself or losing yourself in order to raise a family. The latest one I saw was an older couple acting goofy in public. They were skipping down the hallway in an airport or something, and the caption says something like this: "Forgive your parents for being childlike because they gave up their 20s to raise you." No, they didn't give it up. They didn't give it up to raise you. They lived through their 20s and 30s. They were alive. They were developing. They were growing. They were learning things. And they were learning things they could not have learned otherwise. And they did it while they were young enough to not be completely exhausted by it. The underlying implication is that your parents' lives would have been richer, fuller, more meaningful if they had not raised you during that time. That if they'd just gone to a few more frat parties or gone to the club a few more times or experimented with drugs or slept around more or backpacked through Europe or just gotten drunk a dozen more times, that they would have been able to purge themselves of this childlikeness or the fun, and that now they have to recreate it because they missed it all. And they missed it creating and caring for actual living human beings. If only I'd been able to drink myself into a hangover just a few times instead of raising children. That framing seems so backward to me. And finally, on today's list is educated people. Now look, I'm decently educated. I have a bachelor's degree. My husband has a PhD. But it's when educated people elevate their general level of understanding beyond what they actually know. I've encountered this mostly with medical experts and people in education. Now, it goes other places, but that's where I've seen it most in the past few years. So probably the greatest piece of advice I have is that when deciding how much veracity to offer someone, when they're making a claim of authority based on their certification, is just find out what's actually required in order to get that certification. What does it cover? What does it not cover? What did they study? What did they not? Credentials can matter, but they're not omniscience. Thank you for letting me get that off my chest in what's hopefully a fairly appropriate venue. Deep cleansing breath. And release. Let's do it together. Thanks for watching. It would mean a lot if you'd subscribe and take a minute to watch a couple of other vlogs. I'd love to get your input. Now you have a very peaceful rest of your week.